My wife wanted to ruin my career over an embarrassing childhood photo, but she never expected me to find the financial records proving she was secretly preparing for war. The screen glowed, bathing my face in a cold blue light, but the chill I felt had nothing to do with the late hour. It was the kind of cold that sinks into your bones, the kind you feel when you realize the foundation of your entire adult life was built on quicksand. My wife Sarah was asleep beside me, her breathing soft and rhythmic, utterly oblivious to the digital betrayal unfolding on my phone. I should have turned the phone off hours ago, but I'd been scrolling through old work chats, laughing at some ancient inside joke, when the notification flashed. An email from HR flagged urgent workplace conduct review. I clicked it open, bracing myself for some trivial complaint about expense reports or a late submission. What flooded my inbox wasn't trivial. It was a formal complaint initiated by my new department head, Mr. Henderson, regarding my professional demeanor and suitability for a leadership role. Attached were several documents labeled exhibits. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic trapped bird. The first exhibit was a screenshot, a grainy, low-resolution photograph. It was me, age 7, at a birthday party, wearing a homemade Superman cape made of a stained red towel, my face smeared with chocolate cake, one front tooth missing. Below the image, a string of comments from people I worked alongside every day, people whose respect I desperately needed for this promotion I'd been gunning for since I started at Sterling Corp 5 years ago. Check out the fearless leader, everyone. Still fighting crime in a bath towel, I see. Wow, that cape really brings out the commitment issues, Mark. I scrolled down, my stomach churning. It wasn't just the one photo. There were 5 others. Me trying to juggle 3 oranges and failing spectacularly in high school. Me posing awkwardly at the company Christmas party 3 years ago, having clearly misjudged the strength of the complimentary punch. Each one was accompanied by a snide, cutting remark designed not just to embarrass, but to undermine, to make me look small, incompetent, and frankly, ridiculous in front of the people who held my career in their hands. Who had access to these? I only shared those old albums with a handful of close friends and family, people I trusted implicitly, people I thought I trusted. My mind flashed immediately to Sarah. We had been married for 3 years, together for 7. She was the only person I'd given full access to my old cloud storage, the repository of every awkward moment from my youth, digitized and meticulously organized. We used to laugh about them together, spending rainy Sunday afternoons reminiscing about childhood mishaps. She had a photographic memory and a devilish sense of humor. She also knew exactly how much this promotion meant to me, how many late nights, skipped weekends, and suffocating presentations I'd endured to reach this level. I scrolled further down the HR document. The complaint wasn't anonymous. It was signed off by Henderson, citing repeated instances of inappropriate digital sharing impacting team morale, and beneath that, a mandatory meeting scheduled for 8 a.m. the next morning. The context was clear. Sarah hadn't just shared a few embarrassing pictures. She'd weaponized them. I quietly slid out of bed, my movements stiff, every nerve ending screaming. I needed confirmation, but confronting her now, in the middle of the night, felt like detonating a bomb in our quiet apartment. I tiptoed into the home office, flicked on the desk lamp just enough to see the keyboard, and logged into her personal email account. I didn't even have to guess the password. It was our anniversary date, followed by the name of her first pet. Pathetic, really, how easily I breached her digital walls when she had so expertly demolished mine. Her sent folder was a graveyard of receipts and junk mail until I hit the timestamp from 2 weeks ago. A single email addressed to a private, untraceable account, but the subject line made my blood run cold. Operation Look Who's Talking. The recipient's name wasn't visible, but the body of the message was an absolute confession, crafted with the chilling precision of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Henderson seemed hesitant about Mark taking the director role, said he needed more proof of leadership maturity. I took care of it. Attached are the gems. I think the one with the cape should seal the deal. He'll never see it coming. Just make sure the trail goes cold, and that he thinks it was an accidental leak from an old college buddy. He'll never suspect me. He trusts me implicitly. Let me know when the hammer drops. XOXO. The XOXO was the final, sickening punctuation mark. This wasn't a prank gone wrong. This was calculated sabotage, executed by the person who slept beside me, who shared my bed, who looked me in the eye every morning and told me she loved me. I leaned back in the chair, the plastic digging into my spine. The weight of the realization was crushing. She hadn't just hurt my feelings, she had systematically destroyed my professional future because she was jealous or bored, or maybe just wanted to see me squirm. The promotion wasn't just about money. It was about respect, about proving I was more than just the clumsy kid in the towel. And Sarah had ensured that proof would never materialize. The logical next step, the one that kept flashing in my mind, was to wake her up, present the evidence, and demand an explanation. But then what? We were married. We had a mortgage. The thought of the chaos, the destruction of everything we built, made me physically nauseous. But the alternative, walking into that 8 a.m. meeting, letting Henderson subtly dismantle my career based on her malicious lies, while Sarah sat at home pretending to be supportive, that felt like a slow, suffocating death. I looked back at the screen. The email was still open. Her account was still logged in. The silence of the apartment pressed in around me, amplifying the terrible choice I had to make right now, before dawn broke. Do I confront the person who tried to ruin me in the most intimate, agonizing way possible? Or do I use the weapon she handed me, just as maliciously, against her? My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could delete the sent email. I could log out, go back to bed, and pretend I hadn't seen a thing, letting the HR review proceed, letting her betrayal fester in silence. Or I could find something even worse in her digital life. She had shown me the power of a secret leveraged correctly. If she wanted a war fought with hidden truths, I was now officially enlisted. My gaze drifted to the desktop wallpaper, a smiling picture of Sarah on our honeymoon. I closed my eyes, took a deep, shuddering breath, and clicked on the browser history tab she'd forgotten to clear. There was a file downloaded 3 days ago, heavily encrypted, named simply trust_fund_details. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that whatever was in that file was going to be infinitely more devastating than a cake-smeared face. And this time, I wouldn't wait for HR to call a meeting. The file name, trust_fund_details, was a direct hit on my vulnerability. Our finances were mostly separate, a decision Sarah had championed early on, claiming it fostered financial independence within the marriage. I'd laughed it off, but now I felt the icy grip of suspicion tightening around my throat. If she was secretly undermining my career, what else had she been planning? My hands were shaking so violently I almost hit the wrong keys. I opened the encrypted file. It required a password, naturally. I tried our anniversary again, then our dog's name, then Superman cape in a moment of bitter irony. All failed. This suggested a level of foresight I hadn't given her credit for. She wasn't just reactive, she was meticulously prepared for disaster. I thought about the one thing she was truly obsessive about, her mother's inheritance. Sarah's mother had passed away 2 years ago, leaving a significant estate that Sarah claimed was tied up in legal trusts, accessible only upon certain conditions, usually tied to the duration of a marriage or the birth of children. Sarah frequently complained about how restrictive the stipulations were. I typed in her mother's full maiden name, followed by the year of her death. Click. The file opened, not with bank statements, but with scanned legal documents, wills, correspondence with an estate lawyer in a different state, and most damningly, a signed declaration dated 6 months ago. The declaration stated, in clear legalese, that Sarah had successfully petitioned the court to have a substantial portion of the trust released early, citing marital instability and concerns over the financial future of the beneficiary. The transfer was completed 3 months ago. 3 months. That was right around the time she started casually mentioning how stressed I seemed about work, suggesting I needed to take a break from chasing the director role. She wasn't just trying to keep me small, she was preparing an exit strategy funded by her dead mother's money, while simultaneously attempting to cripple my ability to argue for a fair settlement should our marriage dissolve. I scanned the attached bank transfer confirmations. The amount was staggering. It was enough money to live comfortably for years, easily enough to finance a very aggressive, very public divorce case, where I would look like the financially dependent, slightly ridiculous man mocked in tacky childhood photos. The shock had faded, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. There was no salvaging this. The gentle, loving partner was a meticulously constructed facade, a decoy, while she looted the assets and sabotaged my reputation. I had to move before she woke up. If I deleted this file now, she would know I snooped and cover her tracks. I needed proof that was outside the reach of her deleting fingers, something untouchable, something that could be introduced when the inevitable confrontation happened tomorrow morning. I quickly copied the critical documents, the petition, the transfer notice, and the photo-sharing email, onto a burner USB drive I kept hidden in the back of my modem for emergencies. I then did something equally irreversible. I went back to her primary email, navigated to the sent item containing the Operation Look Who's Talking message, and instead of deleting it, I forwarded it to 3 places: my personal lawyer's unmonitored archival address, a secure encrypted cloud folder I only accessed once a year, and, in a moment of pure, reckless impulse, a colleague in a completely different division whom I knew had a long-standing, barely concealed feud with Mr. Henderson. It was a desperate move, an attempt to introduce chaos that might obscure my own initial transgression of snooping, but right now, I needed smoke and mirrors. As I pulled the USB drive out, the office lights seemed too bright, too harsh for this clandestine operation. I surveyed the room, ensuring every trace of my activity, the open browser windows, the slightly shifted position of the desk chair, was erased. I crept back into the bedroom, moving with the silent discipline I'd honed during years of tense family visits where keeping the peace was paramount. I slipped back under the covers. Sarah didn't stir. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the USB drive burning a hole in my pajama pocket. I had just gathered the evidence for total war, evidence that proved fraud and malice aforethought. The crucial question remained: how did she get those specific photos? I knew I had locked that shared folder after the first year of marriage, tightening security after a relative of hers tried to access it once. Sarah shouldn't have had recent, unfettered access to the originals. Unless... I remembered a conversation from last Christmas. We'd been looking at old pictures on my laptop, and Sarah mentioned the screen resolution seemed blurry when she tried to zoom in on a picture of me playing backyard football. She had insisted on optimizing the files for better viewing quality, claiming she had a special compression tool that didn't degrade the image. I let her do it, figuring she was just being helpful. The implication slammed into me. She hadn't just looked at the folder. She had taken the source material, likely copied and pasted the original, uncompressed files onto a separate drive, and then used that private drive to stage the leak to Henderson's office. She hadn't just shared embarrassment. She had manufactured evidence using archival material she had illicitly copied. Just as I started to process this final layer of deceit, the phone on her nightstand buzzed, a soft, almost silent vibration that sounded like a thunderclap in the quiet room. I watched her hand, moving almost subconsciously in her sleep, reach out and blindly swipe the screen. Her eyes remained closed, but I saw her thumb briefly pause over the notification. A second later, I heard a faint, almost inaudible whisper escape her lips, a soft sound that cut through the silence like shattered glass. "Yes, darling, it's handled. He suspects nothing." That whisper, "It's handled, he suspects nothing," was the confirmation I needed, colder and more definitive than any written document. It meant she wasn't just coordinating with some external source. She was actively managing the fallout, possibly even communicating with Henderson or someone else pulling the strings behind the scenes. My initial assumption that she was acting alone, fueled by petty jealousy, seemed dangerously naive. This felt like a coordinated effort to sideline me entirely. I lay perfectly still, not daring to breathe too deeply. Who was Darling? Henderson? Or someone even further up the corporate food chain, someone who stood to gain more from my removal than Sarah did? I needed to know what she was handling. Her phone was already positioned perfectly in her grasp. I waited, tense, for the next movement. After a tense minute, her thumb moved again, tapping the screen rapidly, clearly sending a response. The soft glow of the screen illuminated the side of her face, revealing the subtle, satisfied curve of her mouth even in sleep. She was winning, and I was still trapped in the role of the oblivious husband. I couldn't wait until 8 a.m. I had to know the immediate danger. I gently slipped my hand under the pillow, locating the burner USB drive. I needed to access the internet, but not on my laptop, which was on the shared network and might log activity. I reached slowly, carefully, toward the small, rarely used tablet I kept in the bedside drawer, ostensibly for reading books, but which I always kept logged out of our shared Wi-Fi and tethered to a private mobile hotspot for extreme privacy when traveling. I powered the tablet on, the screen barely illuminating the immediate area. I quickly opened the secured folder containing the copied documents. I needed to cross-reference the trust_fund_details with the photo leak timeline. If she petitioned the court 6 months ago, but only sent the initial email 2 weeks ago, what happened in the intervening 4 months? I zoomed in on the estate lawyer's correspondence. The lawyer had mentioned Sarah receiving advice from a trusted confidant regarding the most effective timeline for asset reallocation. This confidant was mentioned repeatedly, always in relation to managing the narrative of the impending divorce, which, interestingly, was always framed as my potential decision, not hers. My eyes scanned the documents, searching for a name, an initial, anything that wasn't Sarah's. And there it was, tucked into a hastily scribbled margin note on a draft timeline. Consult with RV regarding Henderson Leverage. RV. The initial sent chills down my spine. Reginald Vance. He was a senior vice president at Sterling Corp., a direct rival of Henderson's for the regional presidency, and someone I'd only ever met at awkward cocktail events. Vance was known for being ruthless, operating through proxies, and never getting his own hands dirty. If Vance was involved, this wasn't about a petty domestic dispute or a promotion. This was corporate warfare, and Sarah was his key operative on the inside. If Vance was directing her, it explained the precision, the corporate sabotage, and the deep understanding of how to use my career anxieties against me. Sarah wasn't just jealous. She was executing a well-funded, high-level corporate maneuver disguised as a domestic breakdown. I looked back at Sarah. Her hand was still clutching the phone. She must have finished texting, "Darling." I had to see who she was texting. It was a massive risk. The slightest noise or glare from the screen could wake her, but the name Reginald Vance superseded all caution. I leaned in close, practically inhaling the scent of lavender from her hair. Her thumb tapped the screen again, this time opening a messaging app. It wasn't text messaging. It was a secure, end-to-end encrypted chat application I didn't recognize. The interface was dark gray and minimalist. I watched, frozen, as her sleeping thumb navigated to the conversation with RV. The message she had just sent was visible. Confirmed. He's locked in for the 8 a.m. review. Henderson seemed nervous when I brought up the HR file leak. He's taking the bait. Just waiting for the final instruction regarding the liquidation schedule. Need to secure the house equity before he gets suspicious about the offshore accounts. Offshore accounts? My name wasn't on any offshore accounts. This wasn't just about the trust fund. She was moving significant assets I didn't even know existed, assets that likely originated from my financial portfolio or shared marital property, all under the guise of preparing for my imagined infidelity or breakdown. But the very last line of her message made my heart stop beating entirely. It was addressed to RV, but it felt like a direct threat aimed at my very existence. P.S. I confirmed the date for the specialized security audit tomorrow. If he tries anything clever, the investigators will be waiting at his desk to review the security logs from the main server room before he even clears security check-in. An investigation. A security audit. They weren't just trying to get me fired. They were setting me up to look like an industrial spy, or worse, a corporate saboteur, using some fabricated log entry that would be flagged the moment I logged into my terminal tomorrow morning. They were preparing to hit me with an accusation of a severe criminal breach of company protocols, something that carried more weight than just poor performance reviews. This was an attempt to ensure I faced a far more serious legal reckoning than just unemployment. I pulled back from the tablet as if burned. My mind raced. If I went to work tomorrow, I would be walking into an ambush, where the authorities, or at least internal security looking for a scapegoat, would already have their evidence package ready, timed perfectly to coincide with my arrival after the embarrassing photo scandal broke. I had maybe 6 hours until dawn. I had the evidence of marital fraud and malicious sabotage on the USB drive, but now I also had knowledge of a pending, potentially criminal setup tied to my professional life. I looked at Sarah, still murmuring softly in her sleep, the picture of innocence masking a highly effective, ruthless strategist who was currently orchestrating my complete professional and financial obliteration. I had to get out of this apartment, now. But where could I go? If I left, she would immediately wake up, see the missing tablet, realize I knew everything, and initiate the lockdown protocol with Vance before I even made it 2 blocks. My eyes fell on the only other person in the room whose allegiance was still, theoretically, mine, my elderly, nearly deaf, golden retriever, Buster, who was currently curled up in his dog bed near the door. Buster was too old for a long journey, but he was too big to simply carry discreetly. I knew what I had to do to buy myself a few critical hours to plan an escape that wouldn't trigger her immediate countermove. I had to create a diversion so large, so undeniable, that she would have no choice but to focus all her energy on managing that crisis, leaving my escape route temporarily clear. It was reckless, destructive, and completely out of character, but I was already being destroyed. I quietly reached into the drawer where Sarah kept her jewelry box, pulled out the emergency house key to our storage unit across town, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I looked around the room one last time, my gaze settling on the one thing in the apartment that meant the absolute world to Sarah, the one thing that guaranteed her undivided, panicked attention for at least the next 24 hours, the antique mahogany grandfather clock she inherited from her mother. The one thing she explicitly forbade me from ever moving or touching. I quietly stood up, picking up a heavy, unused ceramic vase from the shelf. I looked at the clock, then at the sleeping betrayer beside me. This had to be catastrophic. This had to buy me time. I lifted the vase high above my head, feeling the strange, terrifying calm of absolute commitment to ruin. I brought it down with all my force, aiming not for the glass face, but for the delicate, ornate wooden casing near the pendulum housing, praying the resulting noise would be loud enough to wake the entire building, and loud enough to completely distract my wife from checking her burner chat logs before I made my desperate run for the door. The sound of splintering wood and shattering ceramic echoed violently in the pre-dawn silence, followed instantly by Sarah's eyes snapping wide open, not with sleepiness, but with pure predatory rage. The sound was deafening. The heavy ceramic vase didn't just hit the clock, it seemed to detonate against the aged mahogany, sending shards of wood and glass spraying across the polished floorboards. The venerable clock, an heirloom from her mother, didn't just stop. It gave a tortured, grinding groan as the internal mechanism seized, its pendulum hanging crookedly like a broken limb. Sarah didn't scream. That would have been too messy, too emotional. Instead, she shot bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide and startlingly clear in the dim light, fixed on the destruction. For a fraction of a second, she looked genuinely shocked, as if someone had walked in and vandalized her masterpiece. But the shock instantly morphed into something much harder and far more terrifying. Absolute, controlled fury. "What have you done?" she hissed, her voice dangerously low, devoid of the affection she'd perfected for years. She scrambled out of bed, completely forgetting the phone she'd been texting on, which now lay face up on the pillow, displaying the last open chat with RV. This was my window. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed Buster's leash, clipped it onto his collar, and yanked him roughly toward the front door. The dog, startled by the violence and noise, whined but followed. "Don't you dare leave," Sarah shrieked, finally abandoning all pretense of subtlety. She lunged past the ruined clock toward me, moving with an agility that belied her calm demeanor moments before. I managed to yank the door open, pulling Buster out into the hallway of our quiet apartment building. The heavy door slammed shut behind me just as her hand scraped against my shoulder. I bolted down the stairs, the sound of Buster's nails clicking frantically on the marble steps, echoing my own panicked heartbeat. We burst out onto the street. It was still dark, the tail end of the city's deep blue hour. I didn't look back, but I knew she would be right behind me. She wouldn't waste time calling the police over a broken clock. She would immediately realize the implications of my escape, coupled with the open chats and the missing USB drive. Her priority would shift from securing the house to securing the evidence trail. I didn't head toward my car. She knew where it was, and she likely had access to the tracking app. I ran toward the direction of the storage facility, praying the early morning traffic lights wouldn't betray me. As I rounded the corner onto the main boulevard, I pulled out my phone, my hands still shaking, and frantically tried to call my lawyer. No answer. Naturally. It was 5:30 a.m. I had to assume Sarah was already moving. She would cancel the 8 a.m. HR review and likely initiate the security audit Vance mentioned, hoping to pin a data breach on me before I could even explain the photo leak. I needed to get to the storage unit, retrieve whatever critical documents or backups I might have foolishly stored there years ago, and then find a place to hide until a respectable hour, say 9 a.m., when I could contact my lawyer with irrefutable proof of her conspiracy. We were halfway down the block when I saw it. Parked illegally, engine running, a dark, unmarked sedan idling by the curb directly in my path. 2 figures were sitting inside, facing forward, utterly still. They weren't Henderson's security team. They looked too professional, too disconnected. They looked like the kind of people you hire when you need something handled quietly and permanently, the kind of people Reginald Vance would hire. They weren't here for the clock. They were here for me, activated the moment I ran out the door. I changed direction instantly, yanking Buster into a narrow alleyway lined with overflowing dumpsters. The sedan didn't move immediately. They were clearly waiting to see which direction I'd bolt. I could hear the faint, muffled sound of a door opening behind me. Sarah must have made it downstairs faster than I thought, perhaps using a side exit or having a backup car waiting. I dove behind a stack of old wooden pallets, pulling Buster down close to me. The alley smelled foul, but it offered concealment. I risked a glance back toward the street. Sarah was standing where the sedan was parked, her posture rigid. She wasn't screaming my name. She was pointing down the alleyway directly toward my hiding spot. The 2 men in the sedan got out. They weren't wearing company uniforms. They were wearing dark, nondescript jackets, and the way they moved, shouldering their weight, scanning the shadows, told me everything I needed to know about their intentions. These weren't HR compliance officers. Sarah shouted something, her voice carrying clearly, sharp, and commanding. "He has evidence. Don't let him get to the storage unit on 4th Street. Secure the data drive and make sure he stays detained until Vance arrives." Detained. That was a gentle word for what Vance's security consultants were about to do. The men began walking slowly down the alley, spreading out to cut off both exits. I was trapped between a woman who wanted to ruin my career and 2 men who were apparently ready to make sure I never had a career, or perhaps anything else, again. Buster chose that moment to decide he was deeply uncomfortable with the smell and let out a surprisingly loud, deep bark of protest. The 2 men immediately snapped their heads toward the sound. Their movements accelerated from a walk to a menacing jog. I had the USB drive in my pocket, containing the proof of fraud. If they caught me, that drive would be found and destroyed before sunrise. I had one chance. I looked at the end of the alley, a rickety, rusted fire escape leading up 3 stories to the rooftops. It was old, probably illegal to use, but it was my only vertical escape route. As the first man reached the end of the dumpster line, closing the gap to 30 feet, I jammed the USB drive into Buster's mouth, forcing him to hold it gently between his teeth. "Hold it, boy. Good boy. Don't chew," I whispered urgently. Then, without another second of hesitation, I launched myself toward the fire escape, gripping the lowest rung just as the first man yelled, "Stop right there!" The rusted metal of the fire escape screamed in protest as I grabbed the first rung, the sound amplified in the sudden silence after Buster's bark. The initial man, I registered him only as a block of shadow closing in, stopped abruptly, momentarily confused by my vertical retreat and the fact that I had apparently entrusted critical evidence to a 70-pound arthritic retriever. Sarah's voice sliced through the air again, sharp with frustration. "Forget the dog! Get him! He knows about the audit logs!" That was the key phrase, audit logs. They weren't just trying to fire me. They were covering up a massive, premeditated corporate framing. I scrambled upward, 2 rungs at a time, the metal groaning ominously under my weight. Below me, the second man, the driver it looked like, rushed toward Buster, who, bless his loyal heart, was standing his ground by the dumpsters, tail slightly tucked, but the USB drive firmly secured in his jaw. "Leave him, you idiots!" Sarah shrieked, realizing the potential loss of the only physical proof I possessed. But the two hired hands, trained for immediate threat neutralization, followed their primary directive: stop the target. I reached the second landing. From this height, I could see Sarah clearly. She was frantically waving her phone, clearly texting Vance, trying to coordinate their next move while also trying to call off her dogs, the men, from pursuing the dog. I pulled myself onto the roof access point just as the first operative began climbing the fire escape after me. I was lighter, driven by adrenaline and sheer terror of what a corporate security black ops team meant by detained. I slammed the hatch shut and threw the rusty locking bar across it. It wouldn't hold for long, but it bought me seconds. I sprinted across the tar and gravel rooftop, Buster, now slightly less enthusiastic but still faithfully gripping the drive, trailing me. I needed a secure line, a lifeline that didn't run through Sterling Corp's servers or Sarah's network. I spotted the lifeline, the massive satellite dish array atop the adjacent building, housing the regional headquarters of the federal agency that oversaw corporate compliance, the very agency my lawyer was supposed to answer to. Leaping across the narrow gap between the buildings was insane, but the alternative was far worse. I took a running start, tucked Buster tight against my chest, and jumped. We landed hard on the neighboring roof, the impact knocking the wind out of me. Buster let out a startled yelp, but the drive remained intact. I crawled to the nearest maintenance access panel for the satellite hub. This was it. If I could just get a signal out, I could upload everything and trigger an immediate external investigation into both the photo leak and the planned security audit ambush. I fumbled for my burner phone, which I'd wisely kept powered off until this moment. I powered it on and immediately connected to the external maintenance network access point I knew existed for emergency service calls. It was slow, but it was clean, untouchable by Vance or Sarah. With shaking fingers, I located the files on the USB drive, the signed court petition, the timeline notes mentioning RV and the leverage, and the encrypted chat logs proving Sarah was actively coordinating my professional demise. I didn't bother with encryption this time. Speed was everything. I attached the files to a massive, anonymous email dump addressed simultaneously to the highest levels of federal corporate oversight, my lawyer, and, for good measure, the head of HR who had started the whole mess with the embarrassing photo email, CCing Henderson so he would witness the ensuing implosion. The upload bar crawled agonizingly slow. I could hear the sounds of the fire escape hatch being violently battered on the roof I'd just fled. "Mark! You can't run from this. Vance will ruin you legally." Sarah's voice, distant but piercing, carried over the wind. Just as the upload hit 98%, the fire escape hatch burst open. Sarah stood there, breathing hard, her expensive silk robe flapping around her, flanked by the two grim-faced operatives. They had clearly given up on Buster and were now focused solely on me. The lead operative lunged forward. At that exact second, my phone chirped, a single, decisive notification tone. Upload complete. I didn't need to check my email. I knew the information was out. "It's too late, Sarah," I said, standing up slowly, holding Buster protectively. "You wanted to destroy my career with a towel photo? Vance wanted to frame me for corporate espionage? Fine. But now everyone knows exactly who the mastermind is." The operative was only feet away. I raised my hands in surrender, but I held Buster's leash tight. "Tell Vance," I managed, looking directly at Sarah, "that I'll see him and his little security audit in federal court." Before the operative could grab me, the sound of sirens, loud and overwhelming, ripped through the morning air. They weren't local police. These were heavier, official government sirens, converging rapidly on the Sterling Corp building complex. They were here for the investigation triggered by the security breach alarm that had just been tripped by my outgoing data transfer, an alarm designed to flag industrial espionage. The two operatives froze, looking at each other, realizing the amateur hour was over. They weren't just hired muscle anymore. They were now potential co-conspirators in a federal inquiry. Sarah's face went white. The mask she had worn for years shattered, revealing only raw panic. She looked at the approaching flashing lights, then back at me, realizing she had used a powerful corporate weapon against the wrong target, and that weapon had just backfired, bringing the real authorities down on her and Vance. As uniformed federal agents swarmed the roof access moments later, securing the area and immediately directing their attention to the frantic messages being relayed from the Sterling Corp lobby, I stood there, Buster licking my hand, the USB drive safely retrieved and uploaded. I had lost my marriage, my home, and my current job in one catastrophic night. But I walked away from that rooftop not as the humiliated husband mocked in childhood photos, but as the man who exposed a conspiracy orchestrated by his own wife and a powerful executive, armed with nothing but the truth and a very loyal dog. The fallout would be immense, but for the first time in years, I could breathe clean air.